this episode of the Fireside Chat, your weekly source of Viking mayhem, shenanigans, and, well, information. So this week, as always, I have Andrew Valkausis with us, who I always mispronounce his name because that's just who I am.
That's our shtick.
And then, of course, with us today is our special guest, the Professor Dungeon Master himself. How are you doing?
Terrific. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good,
Fantastic.
pretty good. All right.
Good. It's great to be here.
So, I mean, you already know myself, you already know Andrew, any of you who've already watched. So, let's start off right out the bat. Professor Dungeon Master, can you just go ahead and give us kind of like a rundown of who you are and what you do?
I think he's put in the
Go ahead,
years for the
Andrew.
PhD.
Exactly.
It's I have a YouTube channel called Dungeoncraft where I talk about how to run a better game of Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games, and how to craft terrain and how to kind of homebrew your own rules. And I also cover all different sorts of role-playing games, and I review them.
So, is there like any particular that's your favorite, you would say? Like, are you any biased towards one in particular? I mean, maybe Viking ones, maybe, you know?
Well,
It's like-
I like Viking games, and Dungeons and Dragons is my favorite. And I think that every Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, Mjorkborg, 5e hardcore mode, Dungeon Crawl Classics, Labyrinth Lord, they're all variations of Dungeons and Dragons. But I also read other games like the Ragnarok core rulebook right now. I'm looking at it right now. So I have quite a collection of games. I'm always constantly reading games and looking through them. So Dungeons and Dragons is always my fallback, but I love all games.
And
All
it's
right.
been a crazy year, eh? All those books in the background, for me and you, we've been gathering dust. Everyone's been kind of forced onto the online play. Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, Virtual Tabletop. Did you venture into any of those over the last year and a half?
That's a great question. I visited Fantasy Grounds, and I tried to poke around. I did start an account at Roll20, just so I could poke around and roll the dice. But I mostly run with Zoom if I run games. I have a number of groups. So one is a youth group, and all the youngsters there locally, they're local, but we can't meet in person, so we do it through Zoom. And my long-term group, though, they got vaccinated early, so we've continued to play. We did have a little bit of a delay, about 6 months, where we didn't play. But because they're
Oh, wow.
healthcare providers, we got vaccines very early, and we went back to live play as soon as possible, because my older players do not like virtual tabletops. They refuse to play
I,
on them.
I can totally relate. And the fact that you guys only took a break for 6 months, that's incredible. I'm still on like a year and a half hiatus. I got my second vaccine 3 days ago. And so everything's delayed here. We're running in Canada here. And so despite, what you hear about our free medicine, it's slow as molasses, though, for things like vaccine rollouts. So I'm looking forward to the face-to-face again. It's going to be crazy.
I forget what it's like to be in a room with other people. Like I can't remember the last time I actually played a game with like a group of people.
Well, the
It's
way
been
I
more than a
learned
year.
about the professor is during the pandemic, I was kind of forced onto the internet to get my fix of RPG news and just, listen to other people that are passionate about the subject. And I came across your channel, Dungeoncraft. And I think the first 2-3 episodes I listened to, I was just hooked. I love your take on a lot of the analysis on mechanics and game design and how to run really good dynamics between the DM and the players around the table. Um, Maybe you can talk a little bit about what was the the intended goal when you first started this channel, and then maybe how it changed as you ran through. How many episodes now? Like 200?
200. We aired our 200th episode today. So
Congratulations.
Congrats.
thank you. People can check it out if they haven't seen the 200th episode. So, all right. So to answer your question, what was my initial impetus and how has it changed? My initial goal was to have a YouTube channel that made enough money that I could go to Gen Con and just pay for Gen Con. because that's like my favorite thing in the world. And so the irony of this is this year, it's been sort of like a Twilight Zone experience because the channel is much more successful than I ever imagined. And now I have enough money to pay for Gen Con and get whatever I want, but there is no Gen Con. So it's like that Twilight Zone, you know, where the guy wants to read the books and then the bomb explodes and there are no more people, so he has plenty of time to read, but then he steps on his glass. That's kind of like, I have enough to go to Gen Con, I could go.
Yeah.
But there is a Gen Con, but I'm not going this year. So.
Well, same here. We've opted
Yeah.
out this year. It was just too high risk, and even a lot of the partners that we go with, like Studio 2 and stuff, backed out. So I think we'll make it next year. Have you gone to GaryCon or GameholeCon? Those are very like OSR D&D centric conventions.
Yeah, I want to go to GaryCon. It is, unfortunately, it's during the school year. It's in March. So that makes it really difficult to get there. I'd have to fly. I drive to Gen Con from where I am in the East Coast. And the thing about GaryCon is that that is where all the industry people go. You know, that is all the designers and publishers really go to GaryCon. So I really hope to make it there one day, but I've never had the opportunity to make it. I wouldn't even if I could make it to, you know, even if I wanted to go to Gen Con, I couldn't because it's in September, and that's sort of like, for a teacher, September it's sort of like what April is to a tax accountant. It's just like, you know, it's like explosive. So I do hope to go to more conventions because the channel's been successful. So I want to go out and, you know, meet the Dungeoncraft fans and the patrons who've supported me for so long and run games for them. So hopefully that will happen in 2022.
Beautiful. So what I was going to do is just hit maybe a half a dozen to a dozen of your episodes that resonated with me, and maybe we can just like talk about each one of them in terms of how it has an impact on various games and game design and tabletop dynamics. I think one of the first ones that I ended up watching was your cinematic actions episode that dealt with handing out advantages and disadvantages and using your imagination on how you would grant those or utilize those advantages and disadvantages. And I think the one thing that, you know, resonated with me is when we ended up making Runic Game System, we had multiple levels of crunch in the system, and we wanted people to be able to, at the lowest level of crunch, just be pure narrative. Like, we don't want to worry about the mechanics or what are these modifiers and how do I do an attack of opportunity. It's really just use your imagination and get something off in the scene. And the way it's done in D&D is a little bit harder because you're kind of locked into one crunch mechanic. And I like these little hacks and tweaks that come up on your episode and some of these like smaller indie books that come in and do some modifications for 5e. That was one of the ones that I thought was a really nice take on 5e. I don't know if you can maybe tell us on what was the catalyst. Maybe there was some sort of event around your table or something that made you think of that.
Well, I read an article by Michael Shea who wrote Sly Flourish's Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, which is Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master is a phenomenal book, and I have to review it. Many people already have it, and I follow him on Twitter, and he wrote an article. He's got a website, I think. I'm not sure how to find things on the internet, but I chanced across it, and I thought, this is great stuff. But if essentially you just replace the whole idea of flanking with this cinematic advantage, you tell the game master what you want to do, and they assign a difficulty. And if you do it, you get advantage to your next thing. It's a far more fluid way of running a game, and Dungeoncraft Classics also has a very similar mechanic to that. So I can't take credit for it. It's Michael Shea's thing.
No, for sure. And I think a lot of the things that you touch on, you actually bring in a lot of authors and game designers in terms of, you know, you flash up some books in terms of materials you've read. But I like the fact that you've synthesized many ideas into one episode where you've got something that's like of value for players to take away to the game table. Another one was Balanced Encounters that I watched. And you were saying that, you know, if you've got a whole list of just balanced encounters, they all become just forgettable, and everything becomes monotonous. And I always think about this when I write sagas and adventures for Ragnarok. Is it needs to follow the recipe of a movie or a novel with troughs and peaks in terms of the action, how the heroes are either in front of the eight ball or behind the eight ball. It can't always feel very monotonous. You need situations where the players are going to be like, well, there's no way we're going to roll for initiative here because it's clearly an uphill battle that we're probably not going to win, and it's better to ducktail and run. Other times you can end up having something that's way too easy of an encounter, and you don't even need to roll for initiative. You can just cinematically explain what happens. Everyone just takes a turn and describes how they resolve that encounter. And then other ones, you can have these really pitched battles where it kind of feels like a Warhammer setting where you're like, oh my god, which side's going to win? It's really, really close, and it comes down to a couple of clutch die rolls. What were your thoughts that took you to that episode?
So with that one, that is an episode in my Veiled Society campaign. So I have a new campaign called the Veiled Society based on the Zeb Cook module back from the 1980s, which is about a number of criminal gangs, and they're fighting a street war, kind of like the Capulets and the Montagues in Romeo and Juliet, but there is like a secret cult, a cult of assassins, and I adapted it, and I show there are 4 episodes so far, and I show them pretty much every other week, a couple of times back to back, and it came up during play. Like I do write Dungeoncraft and make episodes far in advance, but what I'm doing is I'll be running my campaign, the Veiled Society campaign, and I don't know what's going to happen in the future episodes. I play it out with my players and think, okay, what would make a good topic for Dungeoncraft? What happens here? And in the case of that one, it was an encounter that was totally lopsided. It was a tower that is leaning, and they have to get this explosive material out of this tower that is leaning, and these alchemists are working and using to synthesize drugs. So it's a situation which is inherently suspenseful because the building is on the verge of collapsing, and you're working with explosive materials, and you have to fight people. So it just struck me as a literally unbalanced encounter. But what I find interesting is I didn't know how my players would solve this problem. I just kind of let them go. I don't think, okay, what's the solution to the problem? Like, that's their deal. That's what they have to do. And so I don't often think about, well, how is this encounter going to be balanced per se? A lot of times it could go either way, but it depends on what the players do. So it really depends on how they approach it. And so I don't really worry about balancing encounters. I let the players kind of take care of that, because if the encounters are too balanced, then you may as well not even roll dice. You may as well not even be there. It's a predetermined outcome, exactly what's going to happen. So that was the impetus for that one. I'm glad you watch recent episodes too. These are all real recent ones. That's great.
Well, I might pull up some older ones because I wasn't going in order. I was just scrolling through, looking at titles, and I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Let's click here. Because, with the pandemic, I had a lot of time on my hands. Another one that was interesting for me was Illusion of Choice. And that one was really interesting because it really pulls away the curtain in terms of just how all RPGs are kind of structured, where, in reality, you've got like a +1 to +5 kind of chance of modifying the situation. Every level you level up and all your monsters level up, so that delta never changes. It's still a +1 to +5, even though the numbers are getting bigger.
Right.
And most games start falling apart around level 10. And, that's because you get to situations where you've got save or die, or just, these alpha strikes that could come in and take someone out no matter how many hit points they have. And, to kind of parallel what struck a chord with me was when we were designing RGS, Runic Game System, we didn't want it to fall apart at level 10 because we were longtime D&D players. And we saw that kind of problem of the further you go in levels, you get in a situation where it really becomes black and white, and, things decide way too quickly. And so in terms of gaining your abilities, pretty much all the abilities in the game, regardless of level, are always the same point cost. So whether you're picking up this ability at level 1 or you're picking it up at level 20 or 40, it's going to be the same impact on the game. What's going to change is as you're leveling up, you're going to get more actions and more of a Rolodex of these abilities. So there's always going to be that kind of feeling that you're still tethered down to a world that works in terms of the math, but you do feel that scalability. And that was one of the things that we wanted to break out of, which is that +1 to +5. And that's what the runes allowed us to do. But this was something that before we went to runes with Fate of the Norns, we used to be a percentile system. And these kind of numbers really did stick a thorn in my side when I was trying to do, let's say, just game design that's going to work and scale nicely. And so I enjoyed that episode very much from that perspective. What brought you to that conclusion or that analysis?
So many years ago, I met Tracy Hickman, who designed Ravenloft, and I'm a big fan of his XDM Extreme Dungeon Mastery. And he's the one that explained to me, like, look, these games are, it's all the same after a certain level. Your character increases in power, but the monsters also increase commensurately in power. So it's really an illusion. You get all these things that you can do, but the monsters have more things they can do. And your players have feats, and then they have legendary actions, and it's constantly balancing itself out. And what ends up happening is it takes much longer. At a high-level game of D&D, if you're 10th, 14th, 15th level, the battles are taking far longer than they do when you're first level, but the results are essentially the same. Mostly the characters win, and occasionally one dies. That's essentially the outcome of the thing. So XDM, Extreme Dungeon Mastery by Tracy Hickman, which Tracy just informed me, because of my video on that, where I recommended that, they're issuing a new print run. Now they're going to be issuing a new print run because now people want it. And I think it's a great book because it really explained to me that, look, these games basically come down to the game master is going to assign you a number to hit. There's a timing mechanism, which was what hit points are. That's what hit points are. They're a timing mechanism. And then when you reach 0, you're dead. And then all the rest of the stuff, like how exactly the magic works and how you hit something, well, it all boils down to it. You got to roll a 20-sided die. You got to roll a percentile die. You got to roll some dice and get a result. So, yeah, role-playing games, it doesn't matter. I mean, it really matters to players what level they are. Levels make players happy. But it doesn't, they feel like they got something. It's a lot like in the school business, when I put a sticker. I put a gold star. It's amazing. High school students love gold stars. They're like, yo, I got a scratch and sniff. Like, they love that. Well done. And you're like, I got a sticker. Like, it's cool. We like getting rewards. That's what levels are. But ultimately, they're imaginary. I mean, the whole game is imaginary. But levels are imaginary. You're not really making progress because all the other creatures get just as powerful too.
So, out of curiosity on that point, though, even on the point where the players are given more tools so they can try more creative options and stuff like that, you're just in your mind at the end of the day, it's really just the same. It's really just I find that really interesting because you're not wrong. It's clicking in my brain right now and it's blowing my mind. But in the sense that, sorry, go ahead.
No, go. You finish your thought.
So in the sense that for example, I have more spells now. I have more utility that I can use as a wizard, or as a paladin, I have more ways of curing and solving different problems, right? Because I have these different abilities available to me. So while it's kind of harder, I find when you're lower level, doesn't it get kind of easier? I have played mostly 5th edition as of late, so I'm really curious.
Well, the idea of option is largely, in my opinion, illusionary. Especially with D&D, D&D players and Pathfinder players, they're like, I want to be able to do more things. So the company that produces this game must tell me more things that I can do.
Okay.
But, why do you even need spells at all? If you play with little kids and you say, okay, you're a wizard. what spells can I cast? I don't know. You tell me. Tell me what spells you want to cast, and I'll tell you what you need to roll on the 20-sided die to do that. And like I played with little kids. I played with this family once in this Gen Con, and I ran a game where the kids were the heroes and their parents were the henchmen. Like carrying their stuff. And this little girl was a wizard, and I said, "What kind of spells do you want to cast?" And she says, "I want to make a rainbow sword and chop the goblin's head off." Right? Now, that's not in a book. It's very creative. So if a little girl in a princess dress wants to chop a goblin's head off with a rainbow sword, I'm all for it. And another thing that little kids love to do is turn things into ice. I guess it's from cartoons or something. They like to turn things into ice, push them over, and shatter them. That's not in any sort of rule system. So it's somehow with games, with role-playing games, we got into the mindset that we have to buy a book and it lays out what we can do. And and magic is really these pre-described things that you can do. Whereas for a little child, they don't have that. So who has more options? The person who is 17 years old, who's read every book, and Tasha's and Xanathar's Guide, they've read every book, they read Anarch Arcana, or the young child that has the beginner mind that doesn't know what the limitations are. So I would posit it's the young child.
I'm with you.
And yeah, and you can make up your own spells. Like you can make up your own spells, and a lot of not only does Tracy Hickman's XDM do that, White Hack does that.
I like DCC for the way spells are a lot more random in Dungeon Crawl Classics.
Yeah.
Which makes it a lot less formulaic.
Yeah, and things can go really wrong with them too.
Yeah.
They don't automatically just trigger. So you have a system that is more unpredictable. To me, magic seems very mechanical. I think 5e is moving to the right direction with cantrips like Firebolt or Eldritch Blast. You have to roll to cast them. Why don't you have to roll to cast any spell?
Because it's boring for the wizard, right? He doesn't get to touch the dice. He just says what he wants to do, right?
Yeah, it is. Why don't wizards get a chance to talk about limiting options? Why don't they have the chance to get a natural 20? And in my game, if you roll a natural 1 when casting a high-powered spell, because like probably the most common thing is like when you look on D&D websites, like the most broken spells, it's like polymorph, because you could polymorph, or summon, a bunch of pixies that can polymorph themselves into tyrannosauruses and fly around eating things, and you get to control them all. And like you could do things like that. My thing is, why don't you have to roll a 20-sided die? And if you have won, these pixies, angry at you for enslaving them, rip you apart, which is what I would do if you try to force me to do your bidding, right? Like, why can't you summon a monster and it drags you straight to hell? Like, that is more cool.
Oh, what's Orcus doing in the room?
Wrong door. Okay, thank you for that. Like, I actually really resonate with that a lot. I really like the flavor of magic not being like confined to math. It's actually my mind, but like, so I really resonate with that. Thank you.
Well, speaking of math, one of the episodes was make combat more exciting, and I think it wasn't a direct message, but it was deeply in your message, was the hit point system. So, hit points originated from chainmail, and units had like 1, 2, 3 hit points, and we find ourselves, in first ed, it went from D4 to D10 with Unearthed Arcana, D12 Barbarians, and now you're looking at hit points that are in the hundreds in 5e. The numbers just keep going up and up and up with every edition. And my biggest beef is hit points are nothing but homework. So all you're doing is math for no purpose, right? So you've got 50 hit points, a troll smacks you for 13, you did some math. Did anything change on your character? Nothing at all. So my question was, why the hell are you doing the math? So that was one of the reasons why we went to the runes as well, because the runes allowed us to get rid of that bookkeeping. And basically the runes live in your bag. The bag is your life total. And every time you take damage, you just reach into your bag and pull out runes from that bag. Meaning, these are no longer runes that you can draw for your future turns. And these runic symbols are tied to your abilities, meaning you've immediately lost access to some of your abilities. So rather than, like look up tables where you say, okay, if I'm under 75% hit points, let's apply these modifiers. If I'm under 50% hit points, let's apply these modifiers. We wanted like an elegant system where combat doesn't slow down with you doing math for the sake of doing math. And when you get hit, it's visceral. There is an immediate impact on your character with no lookup tables, no bookkeeping. And, so when I was listening to that episode, I'm like, yes, amen. Like, we need to do something about hit points because the numbers just keep creeping up and combats are taking longer. And the bulk of it is just doing math for the sake of doing math.
Yep, I agree. I think that, you'll always get people pushing back. Well, you'll just have a monster that can do, 4d20 damage, which is true. You could do that, but, the numbers do get somewhat ridiculous. And here's the thing. You know that you literally can't fall 10 stories and die. Like, if you're 14th level, you can fall 10 stories, and you will live. So it's not that scary falling off anything anymore. And that's my problem, is, like, you feel like you're invincible. Hit point, as I said, is a timing mechanism. The more hit points you run out, as you mentioned with the runes, you draw them from the bag, your bag gets lighter, your characters get weaker, and that's the timing mechanism. And if you have less stuff left, hit points, less runes, the game will be more exciting, because as you run out of things, as you run out of that resource, the game gets more tense. An interesting thing, because I frequently get comments in the comment section from people telling me that I'm ruining the game, or why don't I play some other game?
You're not.
And
I'm there to tell you, you're not.
And so I've met a lot of game designers, and one game designer I met was Jonathan Tweet, he was one of the designers for the 3rd edition. And he's the one that told me he doesn't even roll for damage. Like, if it's your standard infantry orc or something, he's like, you take 5 points of damage. Like, there's an average damage, and you just move on. If it's the big monster, if it's the big baddie, then you can roll it out. But, it's just like, oh, the monster got a critical. Okay, well, now you took, 15 points of damage, and you just move on. So the funny thing about D&D is, having met Jonathan Tweet and Tracy Hickman and Zed Cook and Gary Gygax himself, I can tell you for a fact, nobody plays this game as it's actually written. Nobody.
It's like Monopoly.
The designers... well, I love Monopoly, too. That's another controversial position, because so many people hate it. But the thing about Monopoly house rules is they extend the game, which you don't want to do. An actual by-the-book game of Monopoly should take about 90 minutes. That's what tournament Monopoly takes. But with D&D, see, Monopoly is a competitive game. You got to get a winner and a loser, right? And with D&D, it's collaborative. So you don't have to worry so much about changing rules, because it's a collaborative effort. And I think most of the designers that play D&D, they don't actually have rules. Like, Mike Merles has got his own initiative system. And I got a video coming up that there's a proficiency dice system, which is buried in 263 of the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition, where instead of skills, you would replace the whole proficiency system and skill system with dice. And they do it in 2 pages. It's incredible. No one knows this thing is there, but it's fantastic. And it was used in Shadow of the Demon Lord. And the guy that designed Shadow of the Demon Lord was a designer on 5e.
Yep.
So he took that discarded idea and he brought it to his own game. And then everyone says, you got to play Shadow of the Demon Lord. They got a great skill system. And it's like, that was going to be the skill system for D&D. And my point being is that no one plays these games as they're written. The game it's a framework, and they package it nicely so you buy it. And then you could do what you want with it. But there's no right or wrong way to play. You could just play however you want. So there's not one game of D&D. Even people that are purists and say, oh, you're totally wrong, Professor Dungeon Master. everyone's playing with house rules anyway. It's just the extent to which you play with them.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of sacred cows that come with D&D, but a lot of them have been slaughtered along the way. So, Thaco was the first one to go. The old saving throws, save versus breath weapon or rods, staves, and wands, things like that. And they go. And so there was another episode that we can segue into nicely here is your 6E wish list, which, you talked about like less charts, no initiative. One of the things that, my wife pointed out when she started playing D&D with me is when she was writing down her character sheet, her strength would be +2. Her constitution would be -1. And everyone at the table is like, oh, no, Soph, you got to write down the attribute score. And she was brand new to this, and she's looking at this going like, do I really? Like, what's it used for? It's only the modifier that matters. And so that's one of the things that I was kind of hoping that we see in 6E is just do away with the 3 to 18 or 3 to 20. The modifier is all that matters. And another thing that you had mentioned was really nice, which is spell levels should match your character level. Like, what's this weird obtuse lookup thing where it's like, I'm level 5, but I can only cast level 2 or 3 spells. It just
no sense.
No sense at all. And I'm totally down for the no charts. I hate charts. That's why in Ragnarok you'll be hard pressed to find them. So I know I've read some of the comments in your 6E related videos, and a lot of them are just like people don't want to leave 5E. They're going, oh my god, no, don't abandon 5E. But I think we're at a point where there are a lot of house rules like we were just talking about that do improve the gaming situation around the table. And it's time to implement them into they could do it optional books like they do with Tasha's and whatnot, but if we're going to do away with attribute scores and the no initiative, that was the one that is kind of like it's a tough one for me because I've been trying to do away with initiative in Ragnarok for a couple of years now, and I've tried different approaches, and I still can't find an elegant way to get rid of initiative because I find it too jarring. So you're let's say in an audience with a king, and the negotiation starts to go sour, and someone pulls a sword. Now all of a sudden you're going into initiative and you're switching into combat rules. But what about the person that says, I still want to salvage the scene, I still want to negotiate, I still want to do cinematic actions? It takes you out of that moment, and now you all of a sudden you're going to this mechanic of like, okay, you're going first, and then you're going next, and so this is something that I'm still like trying to find anyone's ideas and just kind of like cobble something together that could replace initiative, because as it stands right now, I think it's an outdated concept, and we need someone to come up with something that replaces it.
So, well, Dungeon World does do away with initiative and you only roll your own dice, and it will give you do it with 2 6-sided dice, and on 5 to 8, well, on a 9 or better you succeed easily, and then I think it's a 4 you fail.
Yeah.
And anywhere from 5 to 8, it's sort of like, well, you might have hit the person, but you took damage yourself.
They attack you back, yeah.
Yeah, so it compresses all those into just one roll. And that's where I started thinking, like, do you really need initiative? Now, originally, Dungeons & Dragons had no initiative system. You just roll in the monster rolls, and if you succeed and the monster fails, it is assumed you struck first.
Yep.
And that's a very abstract way of thinking it. But I'm not sure, but I think that I think it's with, pro sports, with baseball, with football. Everyone wants to go first and have a defined, okay, you got to go first. So I think that for most players, you do need to have an initiative system. I wouldn't kill yourself over it, Andrew. Like, like maybe you just have to have a way. Maybe that's what you can use those 3 to 18 ability scores for in Dungeons & Dragons. Just determine, hey, whoever's got the highest dexterity. You have a 13? Well, you go before 12, and 15 goes before you. That's another way initiative can be done. You toss a 6-sided, and you add it to your dexterity. That would make kind of sense, and that would explain why you have those 3 to 18 numbers. Now, other game systems like Black Hat explain the 3 to 18 because they throw out the modifier. You roll under your ability score on a 20-sided die.
Yeah, that was
Right?
second
So,
ed. Second ed skills.
yeah.
If you remember, you wanted to roll low.
Yeah, yeah. And everything is against your ability score. Like you want to hit something, you got to roll under your strength. You want to shoot somebody with a bow, it's under your dexterity. And if you want to convince somebody, you want to negotiate, it's under your charisma. That makes total consistent sense. I don't think it'll be done with D&D because then you'd have to throw out the idea of the natural 20 because now ones are good and 20s are bad. But I think that most games probably benefit from an initiative system. Some of these episodes that I have, I did things. I ran a game without initiative for a while, for about 6 months, and then I came to the conclusion, you know what? I think we do need an initiative. And then I had a more recent one where I went back to group initiative with a D6.
Mm-hmm.
After trying these things. So I think that it's okay to try things with games and not and be like, yeah, it didn't quite work. Or player-facing combat is another concept.
Yeah, I like Dungeon World. Dungeon World was fun, the way they implemented it, but I'm a little bit of a greedy GM. I like to do stuff too. I like to roll dice. I like to play with runes. So that was one of the things that I was like, I can get behind it, except for that part.
So I guess it really just depends on the players that you have, though.
It does. It does. I think there's some players, my players personally did not like that system at all. They played it twice. And at that point, they said, look, dude, if you're going to... And I was like, this is great. I love this. It's so easy to do the bookkeeping. And they just cornered me and they're like, dude, if you run this, again, we're out. We want D20. And so it does. I mean, ultimately... you have to run what the players like because they're the audience.
For sure.
Agreed. So I think you actually in that discussion we covered two more videos, which was speed up combat and player facing that you talked in 2 other videos. There's one other video that stood out to me, which was the problem with charisma and int. So what if the player isn't as charismatic or as smart as their character? That's quite the catch-22 at the table, right?
At most of it, right? So, with charisma, it's really there's 2 ways you could look at it. That it's the most fascinating ability score because there's really only 2 ways. One is roll the dice and then interpret them. Like, oh, I rolled an 18. What does that mean for convincing the king? And that's what you do if the player is shy or the player is young and doesn't know the right thing to say to the king, but the character would. But the other way to do it is, and many game masters do it this way, all right, we'll roll it out and I'll adjust that target number that you need, and then you can add your dice. Now, the only problem with that is the person could give the most brilliant oration and roll a 2 and you fail. So That's the problem. Neither quite works all that well. So ultimately, the game master just got to make a decision based on what seems right for your group. But that's a problem that will never be solved. That'll never be solved. It's unsolvable.
Yep, and intelligence. I've had players that are like, I can't solve this riddle, but my wizard with 22 inch should, so I'm rolling for it. I'm not solving your puzzle here in person.
Yeah.
Roll the self puzzle.
Yes.
And there's a logic to that too. There's a logic to that. Like, hey, you don't expect me to do 30 perfect push-ups, but my barbarian has an 18 strength. So why does he? Why do I have to solve this puzzle? Why is physical things, you don't expect me to be physical, but you expect me to be intelligent and charismatic? And it's always a quandary that can never be solved because here's the thing about games. We're always trying to replicate physics and science and magic, though magic doesn't exist. And magic. But you can't. No game can consistently do that. Like, no game can capture how the human brain thinks. Like, we all have these different skills. And different skills, like painting miniatures. Painting miniatures, right? This is a skill that I've sat down with my friends and I say, look, watch how I paint this, do this. And within a couple of sessions, they're pretty good. But playing a musical instrument takes longer. Playing the violin takes longer to get decent at than painting miniature. And brain surgery takes much longer than that. So how do you create a system that does brain surgery? It's a surgery, healing, magic, hitting with a sword, hitting with a crossbow. You can't really. You can't. So you just have to live with it. You have to create a system and ultimately that's why you have a game master, because they have to decide how things are going to work out and interpret between the rules that can never be a rule.
That's it, and you've got that subjective battle versus objective battle, right? So sometimes you've got a really good GM behind the screen, and they can adjudicate very well. But there are other people that are starting out as GMs or just never come into their own as GMs that just make poor decisions when it comes down to what the players want to do, and it kind of creates frustration. And that's where the players go, well, let's play a crunchier system where the mechanics, we're all playing by this bound contract of mechanics. But the better the GM, the easier it is to say, let's play something freeform and more cinematic and narrative. Let's say Fate versus Rollmaster, right? If we're going to take like two extremes of, rules heavy versus very fluffy and light. I think based on the players, based on the capacity of the GM, there's a lot of these options that are available to cover all of these scenarios, right? Whether you want something like the hero system or GURPS that has just so many splat books and abilities that try to mimic every genre in existence, versus, again, I'll go back to Fate, which is just everything's an aspect, or just, your imagination's the limit, and your GM's going to make a call. Is this something that you need to pay for? Is this going to be a free feat? That kind of like brought me to creating an RPG with multiple levels of crunch, because that was one of the really, really annoying part of RPGing for 20 plus years, is seeing that everyone at the table has a different threshold for math and mechanics. You can never have like a table of everyone's going like, oh yeah, let's play Fate, or let's play Shadowrun 6th edition. You're gonna have someone that's gonna be like, oh, shoot me now, no. And so we really wanted to have a system where everyone can play at the level of crunch they enjoy. So we have like a cinematic level, which is just play a rune and articulate a verb. So if you've got 3 runes, just articulate 3 verbs of what you want to do. So you say, I draw my sword and I run across the room and I stab him in the face. So there you go. Draw, run, stab, right? And that's the lowest level of crunch. And you have the people that don't enjoy heavy rules playing the game, alongside someone who's saying, I'm pulling these runes and these are the symbols that are tied to these abilities. That's the mid-level of crunch. And then the highest level of crunch, now these are for the combo players, they can actually assign the runes in a specific order and create rune chains that change the way the powers work. And that kind of scratches the itch of that min-maxer combo player where the endorphins go off in the brain when they're like, oh yeah, this is the ultimate play. And the mechanics tie that all together and allow everyone at the table to play at the same time in the same experience using the level that they enjoy. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping like more and more RPGs embrace, which is players might say, I love Star Wars, but you're locked into one level of crunch with the Star Wars rules. Why not have a variable set of rules that allow people to play at different levels of complexity? There are some games that come out with like the prime or the starter versions of the rules, which I think is a good way to begin. But I would challenge my fellow designers to like embrace more and more this kind of seamless scale that will allow players to play at the table with varying levels of interest and aptitude in mechanics and math.
Yeah, I'd be really, if I were going to Gen Con and if you were going to Gen Con, I'd really want to play this game. I really want to see it happen because I'm just really curious, and I'd really like my wife to play it too. Like, I'd like to have a number of different types of players to see what kind of combinations like we could come up with. Let me ask you, Andrew, like, how many people do you think this game is ideal for?
I've run this for as few as 1 or 2 players all the way to like 8 or 9 players, and
8 or 9?
Yeah, 8 or 9 players at the table. Because what happens is, as long as everyone is, so here's another side effect of the mechanics that actually I liked, but it wasn't part of my original design. It was a happy accident. If you remember the advent of the smartphone, players would, say, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to do for my next 3 rounds, and they disengage, and they go play Angry Birds on their phone. And when it's their turn, they're like, oh, I cast Fireball. They roll their dice, they disengage again. And the thing with the runes is, every single round, players are drawing the runes at random from their bag, so they can't pre-plan what they're going to do, unless it's cinematic actions, which is just going to be verbs. But they don't know which symbols they're going to draw. And built into the system are a lot of synergies between players. So it was a nice side effect when the cell phone revolution happened. The players like try to disengage, and they're like, people are like, what did you draw? Okay, what can we do together? I drew this. And so this kind of cooperation, this happens immediately when a combat round starts. So when someone gets to their turn, they kind of know exactly what they want to do, and away you go. And so this was kind of the factor that allowed us to ramp up the number of players. I think my happy medium is maybe 5 players at the table.
I would agree. And as someone with a bad attention span, I can tell you it definitely helps. Like being able to move the clickety clacks around actively and keeping my attention span, it was very good for that.
And one of the other things is, I played a game of Pathfinder 3 years ago. It was just kind of brutal. I'll never forget it. It was about 25 minutes between turns. So there are a lot of players at the table. And literally we're waiting 20 minutes between the turns. And, my turn rolls around. I roll a 2. Okay, I whiffed. I wait another 20 minutes. I roll like a 4. I wait another 20 minutes. And I think I rolled like a 5, and I'm like, dear God, I wish I rolled a 1. At least something interesting would have happened. And so this is one of the things that we also wanted to fix with the runes is every time you draw your runes, there's no chance of whiff. It's really, what do you want to do with your turn? You're never caught in a situation where you're just sitting there going, I just spent my evening rolling misses. You've got these options that open up on the table in front of you, and it's, what do you want to do with these options? And something's going to happen. And maybe the monster is going to parry and block everything you throw at him, but what does that mean? They just used all their runes to parry and block everything you threw at them. So now your allies can get in. So you do feel still, even though maybe you didn't land a point of damage, you've actually created a point of attrition where your allies can come in and hit him with a killing blow because he's out of actions, out of runes. So yeah, I would love to have you guys at the table. That'd be great.
Oh yeah, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. One of the things. One of the best things about being on YouTube is weaseling my way into people's games. I recently played with DM Scotty, and he tested. I did some play testing for his Easy D6 system, which is great. I don't know if you're familiar with DM Scotty from the DM Scotty, but he's a great guy. And I'd heard the legend of this game, but I actually was able to.
Easy D6 or Tiny D6?
Easy D6. That's Tiny Dungeon. That's it.
Oh yeah.
Also uses D6.
I'm thinking Tiny Dungeon. Okay.
Yeah, Tiny Dungeon is also a good game. I think I'm going to do an episode eventually because I think it's a great game for kids.
Yeah.
But Scotty's system it's called Easy D6, and it's the best D6 game I've ever seen.
Well, coming from you, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I mean it's really good for kids, and I love weaseling my way now into people's games, and I really want to play this game.
Awesome.
I really wish, you're sure you're going to be at Gen Con 2022, right?
Yep.
All right, good, because I'm playing. I'm not going to miss this.
Yeah, we'll have a bunch of games running. Yeah, Aaron usually runs some games as well. We've got a couple of other GMs that come out, or we call them Norns, come out and run some games for us. We also have another game called Vanguard, which is a collaborative storytelling game. So think of this as a RPG ultra light. And this is where everyone around the table gets a chance to tell a chapter of the story. So no one's in the hot seat to actually be narrating the entire game. And it's set at the beginning of the Norse creation myths, which means no one needs to know world canon. There's nothing yet. The world is brand new. Make up whatever you want. And the mechanics uses runes, but they're super simple. One mechanic that rules them all. So once you learn that one mechanic resolution, you can resolve anything in the game with it. So that's another one that we run at Gen Con as well for the people that really like the narrative side of it. So I think we had another... Pardon?
I'm going to be there.
Awesome.
I'm going to be there. is the top of my list right now for games. I love innovative games. That it's so. That's the thing about not to knock like WotC or whatever, but I think big companies like that. It doesn't matter whether it's WotC, it's Apple, Disney. They don't really innovate. They cultivate. Disney is into making more superhero movies with the same formula and making movies of their old movies, and they keep brands alive and they sell T-shirts, but do they really come up with fantastic, compelling new stories? Maybe a couple. I know my daughter loves Coco and Moana. All right, but most of what they produce is just other iterations of other things they've already done. And Apple, I like, have an iPhone, but it's like they're not really innovating with the iPhone. It becomes a better iPhone. And I think that with games, like all the innovative stuff is done by not big companies. It's
Yep.
and
It's
that's
the indie studios for sure they're going to take that risk
100%.
because even if you look at video games, for example, Ubisoft and EA are in the same boat of what you described. Is they just rehash the same mechanics and just reskin it with a different IP. They don't want to take risks, but that's where the little indie publishers come in with lots of gold, and that's what I love about conventions too. Is sitting down and playing games that I've never played before. I look over and I'm like, oh, that looks interesting. Tell me about your game, and away we go. We try something new. I discovered games like Descent, the board game there, that was the first crossover. Well, besides Hero Quest, the first big crossover between RPGs and board games, and that spawned off an entire series of board games after that try to bring in the board gamers into the RPG space. Muhahaha.
Yeah. And so many have done it, even better, I think, than Descent. It's really,
Yeah.
some of the games in that space are really cool.
Agreed. So, what else did we have, Aaron, in terms of questions for the professor while we've got him here? Because we're rounding up about an hour.
Yeah, we are. So, okay. So right here, this is talking about analyzing D&D versions and optimizations from edition 1 through 5, basically kind of like the good, the bad, the ugly. We've already kind of touched base on this for the most part, from my understanding, though.
I think so.
So
what I'd be interested more is we focus a lot on D&D, but
Yeah.
I know a big part of your fan base are diehard Pathfinder players, and so I think this question that Aaron was looking at goes both D&D and Pathfinder. What's your hot take on Pathfinder 1 to Pathfinder 2? For example, I love the action system. I think it's infinitely better, but there are so many other things that players have got beefs with. What's your take between PF1 and PF2?
Oh boy, I'm gonna get in trouble.
No, it's fine.
I had a video.
You can't make
It's
everyone
like
happy.
2 or 3 weeks. I had a video 2 or 3 weeks ago. Is Pathfinder in trouble? And it came to me from an episode of Tenkar's Tavern, which is another YouTube channel. And Eric Tenker does really great analysis with looking at demographic trends, and he's looking at the trends on Roll20 where Pathfinder has got less and less of a market share. And he came to the conclusion that Pathfinder 2 has a little bit of trouble, And speaking to my friends who are Pathfinder players, there seems to be a number of people who didn't feel there needed to be a Pathfinder 2. And that's all I said. And holy crap, I call this the vest of protection. And Pathfinder people really came out to defend their game. And I'm not even dunking on the game. I'm not saying the game is bad. I like Paizo. I have a Pathfinder goblin. I'm a Paizo fan. They subscribe to my channel. I like them. I just think that it seems to me the zeitgeist out there. The feeling is that the Pathfinder audience is a little divided, where you got some people that like the old version, and then some people that like the new version. And what I've learned people are super they really love their games.
It's tribal.
And the people who love Paizo love them because they feel they're more personal. They're not this giant faceless conglomeration that they feel like Hasbro is. And it's interesting. If you say or even say something that's interpreted that like you don't like someone's game, it's like you insulted their whole way of life or their religion. And it's just like that's not the case. I just think that based on what I'm seeing, I have a vibe that like Pathfinder 2 does not have the impact of the first one. I mean, obviously the whole D&D 5e is a juggernaut, but I don't know. There's something that's not as sticky about that version of the game. That's just as an objective person, like what I'm seeing with that particular space, So that's all I can really say about it without knowing it. But man, did I get hammered with that video.
Oh, but that's normal. That's tribalism. You see that in politics now, in vaccination, in everything. Everyone's broken down to their tribes. It's crazy.
Yeah,
but I think it's very healthy for our space, our industry, our games, if we can have these discussions without taking it personally and, dissect things where, for me, I think PF2, the skill system got too heavy. And it's just, you had to really get down into the weeds as soon as you wanted to do something with skills. But the action system, I was so happy it moved out of this like full round action, partial action, free action, 5-foot step, attack of opportunity. It's like you've got 3 actions. You can attack, you can cast spells. They cost 2 actions. It's so much easier to teach to new players, and that's I think might be from 3rd ed to 5th ed is trying to teach new players all of these nebulous actions, and brand new players are just looking like, I don't understand. Like I did this. Is that all I can do? Can I do more? And you're like, well, you can cast a spell, but if you cast a spell, you can't cast a second spell, but you can cast a cantrip as your free action. All these little like edge cases of how your action system works. And I find new players just their heads spin with the action system. It's needlessly complicated.
Even the idea.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can go. You can go.
I used to have an Excel sheet just for my character sheet, just to keep track of all my different actions and the different things I could do when I was playing Pathfinder. And I used to play it for like 2-3 years. I was playing like, not a complicated character. It was like a half-caster type. And it was to the point where I needed macros in my Excel sheet to keep track of all my stats and everything that was going on. For those of you who don't know, macros in Excel sheets are little checkboxes that I click that will essentially start running scripts in different, programming languages in the background to change my stats on my Pathfinder character. So
was this PF1?
This was PF1.
So it's D&D 3.
That's kind of it. And I feel like that's probably where a lot of that, that special place in a lot of people's hearts come from, because it was kind of their safeguard from 4th edition, which I actually kind of like, but that's a whole different bag of bolts.
It's got its pros and cons like every other one.
Yeah. So anyway, that's so to your point, sorry.
It's really interesting, all this teaching the jargon too, like action, bonus action, free action, like these kind of things are just like, why not just call them multiple action? It's like the term preheat the oven. I've been in a 20-year argument with my wife that makes no sense, because we're like, preheat it. No, you heat it. A heated oven is hot. There's 2 states, heating, hot. And she's like, no, preheating is when you heat it before you heat it. And I'm like, I know what you think it means. What I'm saying is it doesn't make sense. Why have actions and bonus actions and free actions? Why not just say you get actions?
Exactly. Amen.
How am I supposed to know when I'm allowed to talk? It's like... So, let's see. What else do we have here? I
really wanted just the runes. Every rune is an action. You see 3 runes in front of you, you've got 3 actions. You draw 4 runes, you've got 4 actions. Go.
There you go.
Like I wanted a system that I could teach easily. If it had like all kinds of edge cases and exceptions to rules, I'm like, no, I'm not interested. We're going to fix this rule set so it just plays as simple as possible. Sorry, Aaron, you're about to ask.
I was actually going to say the next question here.
It might be too
Andrew.
long, that one. We can skip over that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's. So what would you say your go-to RPGs would be for like your home games and stuff? I think you've hinted at like liking D&D, and you mentioned something earlier, but my memory is horrible. Like, what is your like? You want to have a nice weekend and just relax with some players, one-off anything. What is your go-to? The first game come to
My
mind.
my yeah, my go-to is Deathbringer, my version of Dungeons and Dragons. It's somewhere like between the white hack and the black hack. It's in there. It's in there. It's a very simplified version of it's the simplicity of 5e mixed with, well, the mechanics of 5e mixed with and the best of 5e sort of mixed with Moldvay version of D&D. But I'll run
So for the
you know
listeners, the
I'll,
Moldvay version,
the Moldvay is the 1980 version
the
of
red
basic
box.
red box
Yeah.
before the Larry Elmore cover, which the Larry Elmore cover one is pretty much the same game as the Moldvay, but it's got a better layout. But I think just like simple D&D is my favorite. I also like a wide variety of games. If I'm running a horror game, I love Dread. I don't know if you ever played
Jenga,
Dread. You
baby.
play with
Jenga tower.
the Jenga tower. I don't know if you're allowed to say Jenga. They go through a whole rule book without
What?
using the word Jenga because that's trademarked. But that's a fun game. Like, that's a cool game with mechanics. Like, I like games. I also have a game. It's still called Eldritch, which is Call of Cthulhu. But your investigator only has one stat called skill, and like you pick what you're good at, and you just add this die to your d20 whenever you do that thing. And I'll run that. When I want to do Call of Cthulhu, because Call of Cthulhu it's good because it's percentiles, but it takes a long time to make up a character. I just kind of, I got a prop PI. There you go.
There are a lot of
You
skills
know,
in Call. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a big character
that
sheet.
you mostly don't. And you're right. You got the character sheet. It's beautiful, but how many do you use? 5.
Yep.
It's a different 5 depending on your character, but you got it all. Kind of, on that sheet. So whatever I do, it's simple. It's simple that anyone who's never played a role playing game could come to my table and understand how to play in 5 minutes.
Perfect. That's great design. Awesome.
I respect it.
Yeah, my son had the same kind of problem. He played 5e. He tries a bunch of RPGs when he comes to conventions with me, and obviously his friends only know D&D. So they're like, "Oh, can we play D&D?" And so they're like the latest 5e books, and so he takes the books out with them. I'm kind of eavesdropping in the other room watching TV or something, and I hear them for an hour and a half trying to make characters. And all his friends just wander off, just attention span. They can't even finish their characters in an hour and a half, and he's just completely dejected, sitting there trying to finish their characters by himself. And he shows up, and he's like, "Ah, it just didn't work." I said, "We got another idea for you." And I went up to my bookshelf, pulled off my red box, blew the dust off of it, handed it to him, and we went through like a 5-minute quick tutorial so he understands the differences between 5e and this basic one. And he tried it again the week after, and within 20 minutes, everyone had a character. And within the first half hour, they're already rolling initiative. It was a world of difference.
Second edition, right? Red
First,
box.
no, basic.
First?
That's basic. It's
Okay.
not even advanced. Advanced D&D was the
Okay.
first edition, really, of the whole series of 1e
Yeah.
to 5e. But this is basic. So this is where clerics and dwarves are classes as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah,
There's no
exactly.
race. And
Yeah.
but it
And I
has.
think it was better.
Hmm?
I think it was better. I think it was better than Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I've got the other boxes. I've got the rules cyclopedia that they released afterwards, the hardcover book. Yeah. It was a good system.
Very good.
So Andrew, unlike myself, loves minis, and he loves all the minis on your series. So I'm going to give him an option here to talk about minis, as
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Absolutely. So part of the eye candy of watching your videos was just those close-ups of the laboratory and the leaning tower with those cultists and drug dealers, and it looks really, really nice. But you also state that you don't play with hex mats or grid mats. So I think you're marrying the best of two worlds. You've got your minis that inspire inspiration and kind of resolve where everything is, but you also don't end up getting into the weeds of, okay, this is my 5 foot step, or I can't reach this guy unless I do this, and then there's analysis paralysis. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
just give the audience a quick overview of just how you came to that sweet spot.
Well, I like theater of the mind because it's fast. The problem is sometimes what is in my mind, I can't explain it well enough so that your minds see the same thing. And then you get in the argument, I have cover, no, I don't, and that's a problem. And let's face it, minis are just friggin' cool. I mean, it is cool looking at terrain. Now, I have lots of terrain, like professionally built terrain. But I always found that I had to clean it up at the end of the night, and it was kind of a pain in the butt, which is how I came up with Ultimate Dungeon Terrain, right? Which is one made out of styrofoam, like not styrofoam, PVS foam, and you can see there's 3 rings. This is melee, this is ranged, this is on the outer ring. That is, it represents that you can hear the battle, but you can't see it. And imagine, if you would, this is the torchlight. That's what the torchlight shows. So most of the characters will be there. Like instead of building out a dungeon, say, well, here you are at the beginning of the dungeon, I say, all right, here you are in the center, and this is what you see, and I'll build it around you. I'll put a door here, and a staircase here, and a pillar here, and I build it out from the player characters. Now, how far range is this? I don't know. It's ranged. It's within bow shooting distance. It doesn't have to be exact. And if you're here, you just hear it, but you can't intervene. And you put this on a Lazy Susan, and it looks like a dungeon floor, and you can play with miniatures. I happen to have one here, this mad scientist. All right. And so I can build a little laboratory around the mad scientist in just seconds. And then we can spin it. And then someone over here can get in their hands, and this person can move it. And you can move it back and forth. You can move your figures. And it's just faster. And you can store this if you have a small apartment. I get a lot of comments from people in Japan, actually. And they say, like, I've got this apartment. Yeah. And we don't have a lot of space. And this can fit in my bookshelf. So I don't know. It just came to me one day that this would be a faster way to do it. And I have tons of terrain,
No, it looks gorgeous, your terrain.
Yeah.
Whenever you got your little close-ups there, that looks amazing. But when I saw that, the happy medium, like I messaged my friend right away because he was in that kind of same situation. He didn't want to spend a whole lot of time setting up every scenario with, oh, now this is outside the caves, so we need trees and we need hills. Oh, now we're in the dungeon. I have to get the dungeon tiles. Oh, now we're in the village, so I need to get my houses out. He was like, is there any way we can have an abstracted board? And so when I saw that, I was just like, okay, you got to check this out.
I'm not gonna lie, that just kind of blew my mind a little bit. Like, just a little bit. Like, I can't believe I've never thought about that before. Like, that's such a good way of doing it. Like, don't move the players, move the scenery around them. It's like that's so smart. Goddamn. I got nothing.
It's like Hamilton the musical. You put, Hamilton's rapping here, and and then like when he walks somewhere, they just move the stage, but he's still there. He's still center stage. And so I've got a few different ones. I do have wilderness ones. I have tavern looking terrain, but it's always the same 3-ring concept. And it's a concept that I've seen in other games. I'm not taking credit for it. Conan does it. They do abstract zones. I know that
there's that board game, that horror board game where you have to fight monsters and they're attacking you. It's a super expensive one. People spend thousands of dollars.
Kingdom Death.
That's it. Yeah, they have something similar
Kingdom
too.
Death. That's one of the reasons I got it. I realized that I'm playing this game, and by the way, I mean that is a great game. It is sort of like the Inagata Devita of board games. Like, it's so extra, But I did notice that playing that game, you mostly are hunting these animals, these monsters, and they're in the middle of the board. And you spend most of the time kind of going around them. And I was like, this is a lot like D&D, like I'm always building these dungeons that go over the whole living room table. and they went through these rooms quickly, and now everyone's in this corner room fighting this ogre, but they're nowhere near, and no one can see them, and maybe it should be more like Kingdom Death. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Nice. Very good idea. Do we have any questions from our audience? I don't know. Let me just check here.
No, it doesn't look
Well,
like
that would be the
anything
time to
else.
ask, because we are about to wrap up this really fun
Yes.
interview with the professor. And I'm sure there's so many more episodes we could have talked about. I just picked my top 12 there. But you're doing a really
Well,
good
they were
job.
good ones.
Yeah, no, I'm really
Thank
enjoying it. Keep up the good work.
I'm trying. I'm working all the time at it. And in the summer,
No,
full time.
Well, why don't you plug where everyone can find you? So, your Twitter, your YouTube channel, your...
So I'm on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter much, but it's at Dungeoncraft. I think it's at Dungeoncraft is what it's called. And I tweet out every once in a while, like when I put out a new episode. I'm on YouTube at dungeoncraft.com. And I have a Facebook group called Dungeoncraft where fans of the channel can go and talk about different ways to build ultimate dungeon terrain. And there are a lot of people there who've taken it to the next level and make more beautiful terrain than I do. And that's how we roll. I also have a module called Macbeth out on Quest Givers right now. So if you like kind of very gory Scottish Shakespearean type adventures, Macbeth might be for you.
I like the cover. It's very catchy, eye-catchy. It'll pop on a bookshelf.
Garrett DMG did the cover. I think he's great. He did a good job.
Nice. All right.
I'm linking, by the way, everything Dungeoncraft in the chat right now for anyone who's interested, and I will try to remember to link so in the video below in the YouTube stuff. This is a reminder for you, future Aaron. Please do that. So,
Well, perfect.
was there
Professor,
anything
thank
else?
you very much for coming out. It was a pleasure talking to you. And next week, stay tuned. We're going to have Andy and John from the Saga Thing podcast. So 2 professors that have made all of the Viking sagas extremely accessible, and their podcast is ultra entertaining. So we'll have them on next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you, Aaron, for moderating.
Thank you for having me, as always. And, well, for those of you who have joined us, thank you for being here. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, thanks. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Skull.
Skål.
Thanks.